All right. I think we are ready now. Let me pull my PowerPoint back up. Thank you all for your patience. It's all a learning curve for me. Okay, can y'all see the PowerPoint? Melissa, can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
As just one slide, or do you see like my slide deck?
The top of your slide deck. Just
okay, the first one. Okay, that's what I need to know, because on mine it pops up in presenter view, so then I'm not sure. Melissa, we have 3 people in the waiting room, if you can let them in.
Yes,
all right, so today we're going to talk about reactive attachment disorder, and I already mentioned that I'm Carol Cecil. So I've mentioned this a few times, but what I want to tell you next is that if you are, hold on,
equal and then T.
If you are doing this to get credit as a DCBS resource parent, that's a foster parent, adoptive parent, a kinship parent, or a fictive kin parent, someone who's taking care of a child who is in the custody of the state or is in your custody, but for some reason the state is requiring you to have training hours, this is really important for you to do. So please pay attention to it. I've got this slide a few times throughout the training, so if people pop in or if somebody misses it, but to count it as a face-to-face, you have to have your camera on, or it does not count as a face-to-face. You need to use the name that you use on the TRIS system for your training hours. You also will need to email Melissa, my coworker who's also here with me, melissa@kypartnership.org, and she needs your name, your date of birth, and county of residence is what Jennifer Barr from Department for Community-Based Services has shared with us. And then for any of you who want to get a certificate of attendance afterwards, at the very end, I'll have a link for SurveyMonkey, and you'll go there and do an evaluation. And in the next week, Melissa will get you a certificate of an attendance, and we'll send it out. So like I said, this slide will be in here a few times just because I want to make sure people get this one, because if people are on here for that credit, I want to make sure they get their credit. All right, so we're going to move on forward. So first, let me tell you a little bit about me. I've been married almost 35 years in August, whether that be good or whether that be bad. It depends on which day you ask my husband, I'm sure. Excuse me. I have handpicked and homegrown children, and I'll share that with you in a minute. My formal degree and training was as a special ed teacher, and that's what I did for many years. But then I adopted a sibling group of 2. And once I adopted them, I started to learn how to advocate. And then I became an advocate. And eventually I did it for free for a long time. And then I got hired to be a director and to use those parent advocacy skills. And so I've been at Kentucky Partnership for Families and Children for over 20 years. If you're not familiar with us, you can go to our Facebook page, Kentucky Partnership for Families and Children, Inc., or go to our website, kypartnership.org. So that'll give you more information about KPFC. I'm not going to spend a lot of time about who we are. We are a family organization. For some reason, it's frozen up. There we go. This is my family and my rad journey, and it has been a rad journey for sure. So those of you who know, RAD stands for Reactive Attachment Disorder, and you can see my beautiful family here. We have 4 kids. The 2 oldest boys that you can see right here, they were handpicked through the Special Needs Adoption Program in 1990. So this was our first time parenting. We were 26 years old. And when I think back, I think, what was the Department for Community-Based Services thinking to let these 26-year-old babies adopt these boys with some pretty significant behavioral health challenges? We made it through, and they made it through. So that's the good news for any of you raising children with behavioral health challenges, or specifically with reactive attachment disorder. You can survive. And then we have 2 homegrown children. And those are the 2 younger ones that are over here. And currently all my kids are adults, and none of them live at home anymore. And I'm okay with that most of the time, but not all the time. All right, we're going to get on into the training itself. So bonding and attachment, and some people will disagree with this. Some people will agree with it. You have your own opinion, that's fine. This is how I was trained when I was learning to survive raising children with reactive attachment disorder. And so When I was being trained, they talk about a difference between bonding and attachment. Melissa, you got that person in the waiting room? Thank you. And so bonding was like the natural thing that happens. It's between a parent and an infant that occurs right after they're born. And a lot of time it occurs before they're born. And for some families, if you ever watch Finding Lost Loved Ones or whatever that show is called, my mom and I love watching that. You start to see people that have never really met each other, but they're connected biologically. And they just automatically have, not all of them, but many of them automatically have this bond with that biological relative. That's what we're talking about with bonding. It's just somehow that connection you have with somebody that's a biological connection usually. It occurs almost instantly, and it's basically a parent phenomenon, a birth parent phenomenon. Or, like I just said, it might be that you've met a relative, a sibling or a half sibling, or a grandparent that you're biologically connected to, and all of a sudden you see your features, you see your personality traits, and you just feel that immediate connection. And so when we're talking about bonding, that's what I'm referring to. When we're talking about attachment, we have attachments to a lot of folks and to a lot of things. And so attachment happens over time, kind of like if you have a significant other, that just shouldn't be happening immediately. It doesn't usually. It happens over time. You build your friendship, you build the relationship, you get to know each other, and you become such close friends and such attachment that even when you're separated, even when you're far apart, you still are close emotionally, spiritually. It develops gradually and over a long period of time. So for instance, like the example I usually use is that I had a roommate in college and we were extremely close, and we just really enjoyed each other's company. And she moved to Florida with her husband, and I stayed in Kentucky with my husband. And once we had kids, you know, we just really didn't talk to each other hardly at all over the years. Maybe every 5 to 10 years, one of us might call the other one. We would Facebook a little bit, but not very much. But when we called, there was a few minutes of uncomfortableness or awkwardness. You think, oh, what am I going to say? I haven't talked to her in so long. But it only took a few seconds a lot of times. And you ought to, as soon as you kind of got past that awkwardness, you were like, oh, I'm back home with my best friend again. That's attachment. So in the chat box, I'm going to ask you all to kind of list some of the folks that you might have attachment to in your lives. Are we getting any answers, Melissa? Son and spouse, friends, kids and mom, co-workers, yep. Military brothers and sisters, absolutely. When you go through something with people that's really high stress or high intensity, they become friends for life. My child, my best friend of over 20 years, friends from college. Pastor, college friends, work colleagues. Yeah, a lot of people will talk about their church family or their neighborhood family. If you have a neighborhood where a lot of families that have similar age kids and you do dinners at each other's house and you become a really close-knit group. I have one nephew, and where he lives at, they do that. They vacation together. They spend their weekends together. That's going to be part of his attachments, is being in that community now. All right, thank you. Good list. So as we're talking today, I just wanted you to know what I'm referring to when I refer to attachment. I'm referring to that attachment that can grow over time. And so when we take in children that are not biologically related to us, or maybe they are as a niece or nephew, as fictive, or as kin, a relative, then sometimes they might have some attachment challenges. And it takes a long time to get over that for some of our kids. So let me hit on to the next slide. All right, I don't know if y'all can see the little cartoon on that. Tonight's debate, nature versus nurture. And the guy says, you believe in heredity over environment? And he said, yep, I was just born that way. That's how it's what we're talking about with nature versus nurture. I was born in the early 60s, and I remember in the 70s when I was a preteen and teenager that there's a lot of discussion from child development and researchers about nature versus nurture. And a lot of people thought it was all nurture. And what we came to realize is that no, it's not all nurture, and no, it's not all nature. It's a combination of the both. And depending on who each person, some of us have more nature that's directing us, and some of us might have more nurture that's directing us. So let's take a look at those. So for nature is what you're born with. It's that basic wiring. It's how you came out. What it does is you have a potential for certain skills and knowledge. So there are certain things that biologically run in your family. And that might be my nephew that I mentioned, his dad and all his dad's family. So my brother-in-law and all my brother-in-law's siblings, all the male siblings, all were mechanics. My nephew is a fabulous mechanic. And so that's something that was genetic. It doesn't matter how long you teach me how to work on an engine, I'm still not going to know how to put an engine together. Just ain't going to happen for me. That's not what God gave me. But those potential for skills or knowledge. So there are certain things that you're pulled toward and you're good at. And so we're born with things that we're naturally good at. Doesn't mean that we're good at them automatically. It just means that we have a natural gait toward that. Personality. You know, are you outgoing or are you shy? Are you over the top, the life of the party, or, you know, do you like to sit back and watch other people at the party? These are personality traits. Stubbornness. Those of you know me, you know I don't have any stubbornness. Ha, ha, ha. And propensity for certain illnesses or disabilities. And so does heart disease run in your family? Does certain kinds of cancer, breast cancer, or ovarian cancer can run in families? Heart disease, mental illness, or mental health challenges can run in families. And so there might be, we know that alcoholism or addiction can run in families. So there are so many things that you maybe were born with that you have the potential to happen as far as health issues or disabilities. So then let's look at nurture and talk about how nurture plays the way. So when you're born, you already come with a preset group of things you come with. That's just how it is. What the nurturing does is it takes the nature and it fine tunes it. So if you're born with basic wiring in your brain, when you're born, the nurture fine tunes that. And how does it do that? It has that basic wiring, and when a baby is born and they're talked to and they're cooed to and they're read stories and mom or dad sings Itsy Bitsy Spider, all that, all those basic wiring in their brain that they're born with starts to grow and connect, and it makes the basic wiring much higher level, more fine-tuned. So for those of our kids that might have neglect occurring in those early years, then it affects how those connections happen. We might have the potential for certain skills and knowledge, like I mentioned, my nephew who is a mechanic, but he still had to be around his dad. He had a natural gift for it, but he had to be around his dad and be at their shop for him to learn and pick up all the things he knows how to do. So just because you have a potential or a gift in that skill doesn't mean you don't have to learn it. You still have to learn it. You just might be very quick at learning it and very skilled picking up all the nuances of it. So personality traits, nurture can help amend those personality traits. One of my personality traits is I'm a blurter. People don't like blurters. That means I interrupt you when you're saying something because it pops in my head and it pops out my mouth. And I try to amend it because society, my husband especially, tells me that's not okay. And my kids tell me that too. And so how people react to those personalities, we learn to grow over time of how to kind of tweak them so that we're not wearing people out. And then environmental factors affect whether or not that disability or that illness or that health issue happens. So the reality is I might have the propensity to have heart disease in my family. And so environmentally, I know that intellectually. So environmentally, I might eat healthy. I might run 5 miles every day, go to the gym. I might do everything I need to do environmentally to try to not have heart disease. The reality is, for some people that works. For some people, their environment, their nurture can affect their nature. Some people, the same person might do all those things and still have a heart attack at the age of 40. So the reality is nurture does affect nature, and for different people, it's a different amount of influence. I'm hoping that makes sense. So can you give a thumbs up or a yes in the chat box to let me know if that made sense? All right, getting lots of yeses. Perfect. So it really is a combination, and I'll just have to be honest, when we adopted our boys, we really thought love was just enough. And those of you who are raising these kids are probably laughing, and I get it. I'm laughing too. And so let's get into brain development a little bit more before we get into reactive attachment disorder. We have to understand how the brain is supposed to be working so that we understand what's not working for our kids that have attachment challenges. And so what we know about brain development is that a newborn's brain is 1/4 the size of what it will be when it's an adult. By age 3, it's at 80% growth, and by age 5, it's at 90% growth. So back in the early 90s when we adopted our boys, 1990, and we had never heard about reactive attachment disorder, but we knew something wasn't right. We knew something was seriously wrong. And so we started just grasping for any information we could find. And my husband was working on his master's degree, and they had to each take turns training on a topic and sharing resources. And so he brought home this stuff, and it was about attachment disorder. We'd never heard of it. And we started reading it, and it described our boys to a T. So then we went to everything we could find about attachment disorder. And at that time, they said, if you did not get that child attached by the time they were 7, it was probably not going to happen at all. I'm here to tell you, I disagree with that. One son attached when he was a teenager, and the other son attached as an adult. He had to make a conscious choice to attach. So don't think it's so bleak. It's not. It can still be there for you and your kids. All right, what affects brain development? So take a few seconds, and in the chat box, put one thing you think might affect brain development when a baby is in utero or right after a baby is born. What are the things we know will affect their brain development? Lots of people chiming in. Thank you. Drug, alcohol use, nutrition, food, premature, substance abuse. Yep. Okay. Stress, absolutely. Preemies, domestic violence, absolutely. Hugs and connection, touch and emotional contact. Oh, y'all are great. Yes, all of those things. So let me pull up the rest of the slide and let's see what we hit on here. All right. Nutrition, y'all said that, food. So nutrition, let me close that out. Between just mid-gestation and 2 years old. So what is the baby being given? What's the mom eating? Substances and cigarettes are included in that. It can affect the birth weight of a baby. Alcohol, drugs, and I think what we know now is that alcohol really can do more damage than anything else during pregnancy. Not that the other things don't affect, they do, but that oftentimes alcohol can be one of the biggest factors if used during pregnancy. Infections. Most women are immune to most of different kinds of infections, but if they do get exposed to chicken pox or something, they might have to be careful about that. Human stimuli, somebody had talked about, talking to the baby. So facing them, looking at their face, making eye contact, touching, smelling, talking to them. And then language is the talking and the singing and the reading and just really interacting with your baby. So y'all did a great job on that. I love that picture. I found that yesterday. I thought that little baby's too cute. All right, so here we go again. If you're on here as a DCBS resource parent, this is what you have to do. Melissa, will you put your email down in the chat box so they can click on it and send you their name, date of birth, and county of residence? Make sure you have your camera on.
Mm-hmm.
DCBS said they would not count it as a face-to-face training if you did not have your camera on, and you have to make sure you have your name or send your name with Melissa with your email, what your name is on TRIS. We got to make sure we have that. Okay, so we're going to keep going now. All right, let's talk about boys and girls' brains. Back in the 70s, I also remember a lot of discussion and research around this, that if we gave boys dolls, they would be nurturers like the girls were, or more nurturing. And if we gave girls more cars and blocks, then they might be more analytical and building and eye-hand coordination. And that does affect, we already said, nurturing affects nature, but there are some things that nature just does for most kids or most of us based off our gender identity. And so even when we talk about the LGBTQ population gender identity issues, a lot of times they physically are born into one body, but their mind and their heart and their spirit really identifies with the other gender. And so I'm not going to get into a lot about that, but you really have to understand that there are just some givens that happen a lot of times between a boy's brain and a girl's brain. So we're going to look at those comparisons. So here come your boys. They have more lateralized thinking when they're young. The two sides operate more independently. Their left brain and their right brain operate independently from each other. They have slightly larger brains. By age 3, their strength is in visual spatial integration. They're good at puzzles. They're good at eye-hand coordination. And if you can see the picture on here, can anybody tell me what they see that's very typical for little boys this age when they're playing? Can you put it on the chat box? Not just that it's with cars, but how they're playing. Boys at this age, I didn't see anybody in the chat box, so I don't know if I'm just not getting it or what happened. Boys at this age, young kids, and even when they get older, they do a lot of parallel play. So they got the cars on the ground and they might play for hours and not even really talk. They might just make noises. And they may never even have a conversation because that's how boys work. They just play, they make lots of noises. Their hands are always doing something, moving something. So they will do parallel play. And I think my boys probably did that till they were 8 or 9. If we went camping, which we do a lot, when my big boys were younger, and we'd camp right across from the playground so that they could walk over there and we could still see them while we sat out. Well, the boys would go over there, and my nephews and other boys from the camping area would go over there, and they would just be playing in the sand for 2 or 3 hours with their cars and I don't know what all, jumping around, and they were ninjas and who knows what. But they never really talked. They made lots of noises. They might learn each other's names. They might not. So now let's talk about girls. And I will have to say, not all boys are that way, and not all girls are the girls' way. We know that this is a guideline, not a set rule for everybody. So girls, they use both hemispheres of their brain more equally. They're more socially attuned. Vision, hearing, memory, smell, and touch are more acute. So they're paying attention to how they're taking in that information. Visually, hearing, smelling, touching, they're taking information in through all their senses. They're more acute of that. And they're better at verbal tasks. So you can see in this little picture of the little girls, they're interacting with each other. They're participating with each other. They're either singing a little clap song, or they are doing, some type of rhythm or rhyme that actually involves words, not just noises. and actually facing each other, making eye contact, and partnering and collaborating together to do this song. And so the same example of being camping, when the boys would all go over there and play, my niece, who was a little bit younger than the boys, would go over to play, and she'd meet the other little girls over there. And they might be over there for 15 minutes. And when she'd come back to the campsite, we'd say, oh, did you have fun? She'd say, yes. And we'd say, well, who'd you meet? She knew their name, first and last. She knew which campsite they were camping at. And she probably knew their parents' first name and social security numbers. Girls ask the questions. So I always thought that was so funny that the boys would come back and you'd say, oh, who were you playing with? I don't know. Well, you're playing with them a long time. Did you have fun? Yeah. What was their name? I don't know. That wasn't important for the boys to have fun. But girls, because they're so social, it is important for them to make the connections and have those discussions. So for guys that are on this webinar right now, I'm sorry. That's why we girls come home. And when you say, how was your day? And you want us to say, oh, good, or oh, fine. And we start telling you every detail of the day. That's how we were made. And so you just have to suck it up sometimes if you love someone. So just being aware that our brains work really differently. And that's how we were made. So this is the cycle of need or cycle of attachment. There's lots of names for it. Means the same thing. And so many of you may have seen this depending on when you were trained as a foster or adoptive parent, or if you've worked in child development or anything like that. But it's the cycle of need. And this made so much sense to me when I saw it 20 years ago or more, probably 30 years ago. But we all have needs. This is everybody. No matter what age we are, we all have needs. We express that need in ways that we hope are age appropriate. That need gets met by people who are around us and that are capable of meeting that need. And we feel relaxed and satisfied. We feel pretty good until we have another need. And this happens thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of times throughout our whole entire life. But especially when we're little, this is a really big deal. When it happens and that need gets met consistently, so when it works the way it's supposed to work, we feel like we can trust those people who are meeting our needs, and we're more willing to trust others that we don't know. We feel secure in ourselves and we feel secure in our environment, so we feel safe and secure. We feel connected to those people around us. Part of that might be because they're biologically bonded with us, and it might be because it's a babysitter who I'm spending a lot of time with, so I have an attachment to that babysitter. It helps build a conscience. I have a little cartoon that I didn't put in the slide deck, but it's a family circus cartoon, and it has Dolly telling Jeffy having a conscience is hearing mommy's voice inside your head even when she isn't there. So I kind of liked that. And problem solving. So when this happens correctly, you start to learn cause and effect thinking, and you start to see how things are connected, and that helps with problem solving. So this is what happens when it does work right, but and also for adults. So if we're working on a project with a coworker and I have a need and I ask my coworker, okay, I'm going to do this part and you need to do this part. Okay. So I express my need. I need you to do this part. I'll do this part. My coworker says, sure, I'll do that, Carol. No problem. I got it covered. It's time to turn the project into our supervisor. And we meet as we're walking in the supervisor's door, and I have my part ready. And my coworker doesn't. I'm not going to feel relaxed and satisfied as I go in to sit in front of my supervisor. I'm going to feel anxious. I'm going to feel mad or angry. I'm going to be embarrassed maybe. So I'm going to have a lot of negative feelings. So that's what happens when that need is not met. And like I said, this happens throughout our whole lives. But it's so crucial in those early years to help form, that's the nurture that helps some of these other things happen that we talked about, the basic wiring of the brain. And so the cycle of need is what's in the nurturing environment that makes all those other things we talked about with nature versus nurture. It's what makes those things kind of happen. So I want to give you, I told you that my boys, we adopted our boys first, and that we started throwing ourselves into everything we could find about attachment disorder. And so when my boys were 14 and 15, I became pregnant. And so when I had my daughter, I thought, oh, this baby's going to be attached. We're not taking any chances. Oh, no. And so, not that she would have had attachment issues, but, I was just very conscious of the behavior, my behavior or our behavior to her. And so she would not nurse. She took a bottle. And so, as you know, if you've had a newborn at home, they want to be fed even in the middle of the night. So in the middle of the night, when she would cry, I'd get up and get her. And I always had a nightlight on in the kitchen so that I could heat up her bottle and see what I was doing. And so for the first 2 weeks, whenever we walked into the kitchen, she cried. I mean, babies cry. She is screaming. That's expressing her need. Her need is she's hungry. She's expressing that need by wailing, wailing, wailing. And as soon as that bottle gets warm, I put it in her mouth. That need is met. And she's feeling pretty good while she's sucking on that bottle. And when she's done with it, she's all ready to go back to sleep. She's all fat and happy, and she is ready to go back to snoozing. After 2 weeks, she stopped crying as soon as we walked into the kitchen. This was seeing the cycle, seeing the trust. Because what that meant was she recognized that lighting, the nightlight I had on. She recognized that meant my bottle is coming at 2 weeks old. So when we talk about this cycle of need happening and, when they're born and when they're young, that's how quickly that a 2-week-old baby trusted the bottle was coming because a 2-week-old baby recognized the lighting difference. So when I saw that, I was just ecstatic because to be able to see that and experience that in person and to know the stuff I had been taught was like, this is real. So that was very exciting to me. So what we know about kids that this doesn't happen. And so for many of us that are foster, adoptive, or kinship, fictive kin parents, what happens is when our kids are in their biological home, and they might still be in their biological home, but at some point in their early development, the parents that they lived with were not able to meet their needs consistently. And that's an important word. None of us are perfect parents. So it doesn't mean we get 100% as consistent. No. Consistent is you're pretty consistent. It's not 100%. So we have a baby that has a need, food, I just mentioned, they cry, in a family where the family they live with or the people they live with are able to, they meet that need pretty frequently, enough that we call it consistent. And that baby feels relaxed and satisfied until they have a new need, like a diaper change. So that's a safety. You can't sit around in a wet diaper for too long or you're going to have some health issues. So when you fed them a little bit, what goes in must come out. So in a little bit, they're going to have a need to be changed. They're going to express that need by crying because that's what babies do. And in a house where the parents have their needs met and are able to, they're going to get that diaper changed fairly quickly. And that baby's going to say, oh man, life is good. I cry and things happen. I am powerful. I am important. I don't know who these people are, but they are pretty good. I'm kind of liking them. So for our kids that though have a family that is unable to meet that need consistently, it does exactly the opposite. It builds mistrust. So they don't trust the people in their environment. They feel insecure. They're very anxious children a lot of times. For out of my boys, my second son, the younger of the two, he would always be so anxious, his shirt would shake. That was normal for his heart to be like this, for him to, that was normal for him all the time, that to have that level of anxiety. That's not healthy, but that's where he was. He was very anxious. For kids that do not have this met consistently early in life, they might not have attachments, or they have attachment challenges or attachment problems, attachment disorder. It might affect their conscience, because I mentioned a while ago about how your conscience is your mom in your head telling you right from wrong, even when she's not there. Well, the reality is for kids that have attachment issues, they might not have a mom in their head telling them right from wrong, or not consistently telling them right from wrong. And so we often see these kids seem to have a lack of a conscience. For my son, he would say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Mom." And then you could see across his head. I could read it. You probably couldn't have read it, but I could read it, that it scanned across his head like a marquee sign that I got caught. And so if you're raising these kids, you know exactly what I'm talking about. At first, when we first had him and he first moved in, you know, I told the foster mom, "Oh, he's just so remorseful when he does bad things." And she told me later on that just made her laugh when she hung up the phone. She didn't have the heart to tell me the truth. So I figured it out eventually on my own, because it didn't take real long to see, "I'm sorry, I almost killed the hamster. I'm sorry, I got caught almost killing the hamster." So just weird things like that. It also affects problem solving. So when a baby cries and we come running, they learn cause and effect. I am an effective being in this world. So for many of our kids that do not have this, how many of them have a diagnosis of ADHD or a specific learning disability, something? And that might be because part of your organized thinking happens with that cause and effect. I do this, this happens. I do this, this happens. That's an organizational kind of domino effect of connections. And for some of our kids that did not get this early in life, they have difficulty with problem solving. You know, they have one go-to, fight or flight, instead of problem solving and figuring things out. So this is cycle of need is pretty important, of how it's supposed to work and how it doesn't work for all of our kids. All right, this is a video and I'm going to hope that I can get it up and going correctly. Let me see. Hold on just a minute. Be patient with me. All right. Melissa, can you see at the bottom of the screen where it allows me to share my, could y'all hear that when it was coming on?
No.
I didn't think so. Let me stop sharing my screen real quick to see if I can get it back up. Melissa, can you hear that at all?
No.
Okay, I didn't think so. So let me go online and do it that way. I thought I might have to. Okay. Sorry about this. This is part of those technical things. Let me go back to sharing my screen. Hold on. Sorry, guys. I'm trying. Usually it has a place where I can share the volume or share the information with you. Share the sound is what I'm trying to say. So let me see if I can figure that out. Are y'all seeing that or hearing it?
No. Wonder if the recording would have anything to do with it.
It shouldn't. I've shared videos before. I think the sad part is I forgot how I did it. I should have practiced that this morning, so y'all can put that on my evaluation that I sucked at my technology.
You might be able to just share your screen and pull it up on the web page.
Well, that's what I was doing, but usually there's a place on the Zoom that you share the sound. When you pull up the video, it gives you an option to share the sound, and I'm not seeing that. This is my problem. But Desiree, I appreciate you helping me. I'm going to try it.
You're
So
welcome.
let me share the screen. Okay, can y'all see it now?
Yes.
All right. But I don't see a place to, oh, hold on. Let me look up here. Share computer sound. There it is. Let's go for it. Woohoo. Thank you. Thank you for your patience.
A child's experiences during the earliest years of life have a lasting impact on the architecture of the developing brain. Genes provide the basic blueprint, but experiences shape the process that determines whether a child's brain will provide a strong or weak foundation for all future learning, behavior, and health. During this important period of brain development, billions of brain cells called neurons send electrical signals to communicate with each other. These connections form circuits that become the basic foundation of brain architecture. Circuits and connections proliferate at a rapid pace and are reinforced through repeated use. Our experiences and environment dictate which circuits and connections get more use. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent. Meanwhile, connections that are used less fade away through a normal process called pruning. Well-used circuits create lightning-fast pathways for neural signals to travel across regions of the brain. Simple circuits form first, providing a foundation for more complex circuits to build on later. Through this process, neurons form strong circuits and connections for emotions, motor skills, behavioral control, logic, language, and memory during the early critical period of development. With repeated use, these circuits become more efficient and connect to other areas of the brain more rapidly. While they originate in specific areas of the brain, the circuits are interconnected. You can't have one type of skill without the others to support it. Like building a house, everything is connected, and what comes first forms a foundation for all that comes later.
Okay, let me go back to sharing my PowerPoint. All right. So with the, hold on just a second. All right. So what they talk about in that, I think, is so powerful in the video we just watched, because we see how we talk about the nature versus nurture. And I was talking about how the different pieces of the brain connect. And they talk about pruning. So if any of you are gardeners and you deadhead flowers, that same thing happens in the brain, and your brain does it to itself. So the paths that are not used a lot kind of wilt. They kind of deadhead themselves. And the ones that are being used a lot and are being stimulated make those connections like you saw in the video. So that's why it's so important that we help parents understand the importance of interacting with their kids. It's not just enough to make sure they're fed and they're safe. And some parents, that's what they understand their job to be: keep them fed and keep them safe. What we know is if we really want them to reach their potential, we have to do all that singing and playing and nurturing and reading and being silly with them and rolling in the grass with them, whatever it is. We have to be interacting with them. Just saying, go eat dinner or go hang up your coat, that might be necessary, but that's not interacting with them as in they're communicating back with you. So when you're doing that with these little ones, and even when you're pregnant and moms are talking to their babies, and I did that, I read books to my babies in utero. And so even when you're doing all of that, that already starts the brain wiring to connect. So it is just amazing. And what we found out back in, I'm thinking 80s and 90s, I guess probably late 80s, early 90s, when we had a lot of the orphan children who were in orphans in Romania were adopted in America. And so these children had the basic need met of food and safety, but they laid in a baby bed 24 hours a day, or sat up or stood up in the baby bed. But there were so many of them. No, the staff did not have time to pick them up and sing to them and play with them. They just went through and made sure they were fed and they were safe, changed their diapers, fed them, then went to the next kid. And so when many of those kids got to America, their adoptive families thought, well, we've got these little babies. They've not had time to be traumatized. They've not had time to have anything bad happen. But the reality it was, because that early time is so important for the nurturing, many of them had attachment issues. Not all of them, some of them. So just being aware that that early nurturing is just huge. And oftentimes we see children who are adopted young and they have great attachment. And so if a child starts to learn to attach in a healthy way, they can usually transfer that to a different caregiver. And so, but for some kids who didn't get that at all in their early lives, they don't have that to transfer to a different caregiver. So for some kids, I have a friend who adopted I think he was about 4 months old, from Guatemala. You know, he's 22 now, and they are just as close as they've always been close. He was their child from the get-go, but he also was in a foster home in Guatemala, and he was very nurtured and very well taken care of. And when he transitioned to his adoptive family in America, they met with the foster mom. They had things from the foster mom. They continued to keep in contact with the foster mom. And so because he had that early stimulation and connection with his foster mom in Guatemala, he was able to have that attachment with his adoptive parents here in Kentucky. So just realizing that early stimulation is really huge. So a lot of times we might think, oh, they were just neglected. That's all. They weren't beat. Well, neglect can be as damaging or more damaging than even physical abuse a lot of times, physical or sexual abuse, because the neglect really affects those brain connections that can have permanent effects for the rest of the child's life. So just wanted to make sure we hit on that really hard, because that to me was just a huge understanding when I was going through this, trying to cipher for my children. So now we're on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so he says, just like that house has to have that foundation that they talked about in the video, there is a foundation that we have. And we do have to have our physiological needs met before we worry about the other things on the triangle. Physiological is food, water, air. Those are the three things we have to not physically die. So some of our kids, if they had a family who was unable to meet that need of hunger, maybe mom and dad had an addiction issue. And when they were not using, they were able to meet the child's needs, and they fed the child, and they changed the baby, and they played with the baby a little bit. But then later on in the day, if they were using and maybe they were struggling in their parenting, then they might not have. So this time the baby might lie there in the bed and just cry and cry and cry, and nobody comes to do anything. And so that's where that consistency comes in. So we will have kids that hoard food. So some of you might have had a child that was a behavior. They hoarded food because they didn't trust that food would always be available for them. I've heard a lot of foster and adoptive parents have lots of tricks for that, for the hoarding behavior, such as fixing one cabinet area that you would put any snacks in that the child was allowed to have whenever he or she wanted. They had free access to this cabinet, and here are the things you and I both agree on can be in that cabinet that you can have. And they might eat till they get sick because they're so worried about not having food. Some of them will hide the food in their bedroom till it smells. And so you want to find other ways to do that. I know one foster adoptive family that took graham crackers and put them in one of those little Ziploc bags. And then they pinned it to the child's shirt, like their security blanket, kind of like Linus carrying his security blanket around on peanuts. So this little boy had his graham crackers pinned to his shirt because that's what made him feel, I'm okay, I've got food. I've always got food with me. And he eventually didn't need that anymore. because we talked about how behaviors can be shaped because of society. So as he grew, he learned the food was always going to be there and he didn't have to carry around that little baggie pinned to his shirt. So physiological survival or physiological needs are just the basic things our body has to have to live. Safety, when we talk about physiological survival, a lot of people like to say, oh, we have to have clothes. Oh, we have to have houses. No, we don't. There's a lot of homeless people that might not have housing. There are people in different parts of the world that may or may not be living with or without clothes. So realizing safety, our houses provide us safety from bad people and from the weather. Our clothes provide us safety from the sun and elements or people seeing parts of us we maybe would prefer they not see. So clothes and shelter fall under safety, but also what falls under safety, which is so important for our kids with attachment issues or our kids that did not have that cycle of need met consistently, is they get stuck in safety, because safety is also, this is an important one, safety is also freedom from fear, chaos, and anxiety. Freedom from fear, chaos, and anxiety. So if you think about our children who in those early years were not in a place where their parents, biological parents, or whoever their family of origin was not able to take care of them, do you think they had freedom from fear, chaos, and anxiety? Most of them didn't. There's a lot of chaos going on. I always call it a lot of drama. A lot of trauma. So things weren't safe. They maybe weren't being supervised the way they needed to be, or maybe they were being abused. So fear from chaos and anxiety. And so anxiety, I told you my son, he was always like this because he grew up with unpredictability. So when it's not consistently met, they don't know when they go to their biological family or the family that they're who's supposed to be meeting that cycle of need, when they go to that family, if sometimes when my mom or dad is sober, they're able to meet my need, I feel pretty good about that. I'm like, oh, that's good. And the next time I go and I ask them for something and I get smacked across the face or they're sleeping and won't wake up, I don't feel so good about life right now. And so if that's inconsistent, I don't learn that life is predictable. I learn that it's totally high drama, high trauma, nothing is dependable. And so for a lot of our kids that have reactive attachment disorder, I don't know about you parents, but for me, I thought, I have done this. We've done this thousands of times. If you do A, B's going to happen. And we were very consistent about it. And for somehow every time for our boys, it was like, oh, that's going to happen. Like it was a new thing. And we'd done it thousands of times. And part of that goes back to the safety. They're stuck. They're stuck, not feeling that need being met. And so a lot of people, our extended family members or our friends will be like, well, I don't understand why they're still acting that way. They're in a safe home now. They're getting their needs met now. Well, yeah, maybe now that they're in your home. But the reality is in those early years when they really needed it the most, they didn't have that. And so just because you take the child out of that home environment and you place them in another home environment that does meet their needs, the damage is already done. It's done here, and you can't see me pointing to my heart, but it's done in their heart. So intellectually and in their brain and all the connections, there have been changes. They don't trust the other people. So even though we know they're in a safer environment, an environment that's going to meet their needs better, heck, they're foster parents or kinship parents. They've gone through trainings, adoptive parents. We had to go through lots of trainings, and you're still having to go through trainings because you have to have hours every year. That's why some of you are here today. And so, but it doesn't change because the child still doesn't feel it, think it in his head, think that this time's going to be different, think that this place is going to be safe, and they don't feel it in their hearts. So it's real easy for people who know our families on the periphery and they think, I don't know why your child's acting that way. He's got a good home now. Well, just because he has a good home now doesn't mean it changes all that he learned in those early years. It doesn't necessarily change the wiring in his or her brain. So safety is oftentimes where our children with attachment problems get stuck. And guess what? Many of their biological families were stuck there too. So just realize that. I already mentioned some families, all they really pay attention to is the physiological, the make sure they're fed, watered, and you don't let somebody come in and hurt them. But the reality is that's not enough. Kids also have to have these other things. So safety is huge. Love and belonging, that's pretty self-explanatory. We all want to feel like we fit in somewhere. We all want to feel loved. We all want to belong. And so you take a child and you move him from the family that he knows and you put him with a family that he doesn't. And he might eventually feel like he is loved in that new family or that he belongs there. But that's that attachment. It happens over time and it happens gradually. And so some, if they have some ability to have some attachment and trust, they will be patient and they'll see if it gets there. Other ones are so mistrusting, they're going to fight you about love and belonging. They want to fit in and they want to be loved and they want to belong, but not by you. And so just really being aware, it feels real personal. It feels extremely personal when you're the parent, the parenting figure, but it's not. It's not about you at all. It's about what's going on in here and what's going on in their hearts. Self-esteem, how you feel about yourself. For my oldest son, people used to say, oh, he has such good self-esteem. He was good at faking self-esteem. So they were both really tiny when we got them. They were very little, but he would poke out that chest. We called it swell chest. He would swell up, oh, I'm going to kick somebody's butt and I'm going to do blah, blah, blah. And he would and so people thought, oh, he's so confident because he's just ready to take on anybody. But really, that was a protective behavior, a coping behavior, that if I act big, people will leave me alone. And so he really did not have a high self-esteem, and many of our kids don't. Many of our kids struggle with that. When we finally saw our oldest son, he'd probably been with us, I don't know, 8, 9 years, as a teenager, when we finally saw him going, he was dating. He was probably 12 or 13. So, he was seeing her at school and talking to her on the phone. But when he finally said, you know what, I don't think I like her. I don't need her. I think I'm going to break up with her. We were like, oh my gosh, he has enough self-esteem that he can stand up for himself. And he doesn't think he just has to stay in it so that he has somebody there to love him. And that's hard for a lot of people that don't have early trauma and drama. But for our kids that have had that early trauma and drama, to realize they don't have to accept what's there, that they can make choices about it, is pretty big. And then self-actualization is being able to set goals and reach those goals. And so for many of us, if we've had these needs met from the bottom of the triangle all the way up, it is hierarchical in nature, which means that physiological needs have to be met first. So if I'm homeless and I'm starving, I will put my safety at risk. I will risk being arrested and going to jail because I'm going to go steal some food to eat. Because having food to eat is more important than getting caught, if that's where I'm at. So it is hierarchical in nature, and you have to have these bottom four met to be able to have self-actualization. So for many of our children that have attachment disorder, they don't know how to have those goals a lot of times. They want to pick up the guitar and be automatically good at it. Not just have a propensity for it or that's a potential skill they were born with. They think that they should not even have to learn it or practice it. They want to pick something up and boom, they want to go. And my boys, we had such a struggle with that because we wanted them to find what they were good at, but they wouldn't stick with anything long enough to find what they were good at when they were young. Like I said, if they tried any sport or any music instrument, just anything, if they didn't pick it up within like the first lesson, they didn't want to do it anymore. They weren't good enough. And so having them understand that most musicians and most athletes have to really practice to be good. That might be their gift, but they still have to practice and learn how to use that gift. And so for a lot of our kids, they have great difficulty with self-actualization. So just being aware of that. And I know for my son, and this is for a lot of kids, not just my kids with attachment disorder. I can't wait till I'm 18. Blah, blah, blah. I'll be an adult when I'm 18. And I kept saying, but what are you going to do when you turn 18? And that was beyond his realm of comprehension. Now, my biological children, they might say, I can't wait to get out of here when I'm 18, blah, blah, blah. But when you say, well, what are you going to do? They at least had some ideas. I mean, like they could dream of a future. They had a future story in their head. But my boys that have the attachment issues, they didn't have a future story in their head. And guess what? Their biological family probably didn't either. Because if you're stuck in safety, you can't get to self-actualization. You don't work your way up the ladder. You have to work your way up the ladder. So if you're stuck at safety, it's hard to, you're not thinking about things in the future. Safety means you're thinking about right now. What do I have to have at this exact moment to be physically taken care of and to be safe? Mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally. What do I need to be safe? So our kids get stuck in that area, love and belonging, they want it, but they have to trust. To really love and belong in a family, you have to be willing to trust some of those people. Once you do that and you start building those relationships, then you start to feel better about yourself and your esteem grows. And then you can start to have that future story of what you want to do and self-actualization. So this is really hard for our kids and their biological families that get stuck down here in this safety realm of the triangle. Okay, I'm going to stop to see if we have any questions right now. So if you have a question, put it in the chat box for us. Thank you, Marcy, also for sharing the link to the video I was trying to show. Oh, no, you were showing me where I could share it at. Thank you. So anybody have questions? All right, so a lot of you, this may be very basic training at this point, and I apologize if it is. It's always a good refresher. And every time I go through it, something new hits my brain. So we're going to do a poll here in just a second. Let me go to our next slide. So we're going to play detective. We're going to do that by doing a poll. And so I don't know about you all, but when we first became parents to our two older boys, of course, we went from 0 children to an 8 and 9-year-old, 10 months apart, full biological siblings. And we would sit up every night trying to figure out what each behavior meant, what we needed to figure out, how are we going to be better parents for them, what did we need to tweak in our parenting styles. We played detective all the time. And so I'm going to share my poll with you, and you will do it on your side, and then we'll look at the results for it. So I'm giving you scenarios, and I'm wanting you to decide which of these, let me see if it'll let me take it back. I want you to decide which need the child's behavior is telling you. Because children don't come in and say, Mom, I'm feeling very insecure today. No. If they had a bad day at school and people bullied them and they don't feel good about themselves and they're feeling very anxious, they come in and they start tearing up their room. They start throwing things around. They pick a fight with you. So they don't come in and tell us. They show us through their behavior. So we're going to look at some behaviors, and you need to play detective and decide which one of these needs they're telling you they need. So let me get to the poll. I'm going to launch the first poll called Playing Detective. All right, are y'all able to see it? Thank you, Melissa. So take a few seconds and decide. There's 3 questions, I think. So not a lot, not too bad. While you're doing that, Vincent Burdett said that these kids are afraid of change, and they are, because change has been pretty scary for them. It's been a pretty dramatic change to enter foster care or enter having to move with someone else. Okay, I see a few people filling out the poll. 3 out of 50. Come on, folks. Melissa, while they're doing that, can you tell me if you've received very many emails? Okay.
No, I have not.
Okay.
One, I think.
Okay, we're going to hit back on that again in case people need it. All right, we got 15, 17. Keep going, people. Keep going. Woohoo! Okay, we're up to 29. Going to give 10 more seconds. And then we'll kind of talk about them. Toady, I'll show you a slide after we finish this poll and have our discussion on the poll about what you need to do if you need training hours as a resource parent. Okay, we're at our time limit, so I'm going to end the polling and then I'm going to share it with you so we can all look at it. Can y'all see the results? All right, so this first one, the behavior the child is using to express their need is an elementary age child throws away or refuses to do an assignment when they're at school. What need might he or she be demonstrating? And I see lots of different things. Someone thought maybe physiological survival. I think that's the one thing it probably isn't, just because it's not related to food, water, or air. That's physiological survival, food, water, or air. It could be related to safety if the child is doing this to show the teacher, I'm the boss, not you. So it's really about the child's intent of which one of these. That's why you're playing detective. You have to figure it out. You have to know your kid. The better you know your kid, the better you can figure it out. But that takes a while. It could be safety. So if they're doing it about, I'm going to show that teacher, then it could be safety. I don't have to follow their rules. So be aware of that. It could be love and belonging, because it could be, I feel so left out, this is my way of rebelling. Or it could be, safety could also be, I want to show the parents who are raising me right now that I don't have to do good in school if I don't want to, and you can't make me. If it's about a control issue, goes back to safety. So the love and belonging could be if they're wanting to show you they don't fit in, they're not good enough for your family. So even though we have the need to love and belong for our kids that have attachment issues, a lot of times they spend more time trying to not be loved or belong, because they don't know what they're missing. They know it hurt. They know what they have hurts, but they don't know what they're missing to know how much that could help. Self-esteem. It definitely could be self-esteem, not just in our kids that have attachment issues, but in kids in general that might have a learning disability that's not been diagnosed and not being, they're not having an IEP, or they're not having special educational services for that learning disability. They would much rather throw away an assignment than to have to do it and then share in the class. So I would much rather my teacher and my classmates think I'm a real pain in the butt than to know I can't do this math worksheet. Does that make sense to folks? I hope it does. So when I've used to train PTAs and different parent groups, and it wasn't just parent groups that had kids with special needs, it was just parents. And so whenever we talked about something like this, it wasn't necessarily kids that had attachment disorder or behavioral health challenges. One talked specifically about in a certain class that whenever it came to reading, her daughter would either throw a fit so she'd get sent to the principal's office. Guess what? That got her out of reading. Or she would refuse to get her book out and open it, which then she didn't have to read either. She just looked defiant. And so realizing that for many of our kids, if it's because they don't think they can do it, then it might be about self-esteem. I'd rather you think I'm obnoxious, defiant, non-compliant. I'd rather you send me to the principal's office than I don't have to do it and I get out of it. And some of the kids might even think I'm kind of cool for that because, you know, depending on what age you are, some kids are going to think you're pretty cool for that. So could be self-esteem, could be self-actualization. Some of our kids don't think they are worthy of anything. So they sabotage. So they might be able to do all of it. They might be smart enough to do all of it, but they aren't going to because they don't deserve to have a good grade or they don't deserve to be happy. I don't know about you, but out of my two boys, the younger one self-sabotaged frequently, a lot of the time. And so realizing that could be self-actualization is I don't think I deserve a family that loves me and is proud of me, so I'm not going to do it. Number 2, a student practices spelling words for the upcoming spelling bee. So my point in putting this one in here is it's not just negative behaviors, it's also positive behaviors. Our behaviors are working toward one of these needs. And so a student who practices spelling words for the upcoming spelling bee, it would probably not be physiological survival because we already said that's about food, water, air. If it was a hoarding scenario about food, then that would probably or could very likely be a physiological survival, but it's not. It could be safety, maybe. Love and belonging. I hear that a lot of times because they want their parents to be proud of them. They want to fit in. When we get good grades or we do well on something, then people say, oh, that was awesome. You did great. I'm so proud of you. That feels pretty good for some of our kids. For some of our kids who are putting up the walls, they don't want to hear that. Self-esteem, it could be self-esteem. I feel good when I do good on a test. I feel good when I do good on the spelling bee. And it could be self-actualization. If my goal is to be the spelling bee winner for my class and my school and go to the regional spelling bee, then that might be, if that's my goal, then I'm taking the steps to reach that goal. So it could be self-actualization. So it can be any of it's not physiological survival, but it could be any of the other 4. Safety could be that I feel like, and we do see this with some of our kids, like I won't get asked to leave this house if I'm just good enough. So for some of our kids who really want to please the parents they're living with, they'll try everything they can to be the perfect child because then that makes them feel safe because they feel like that will make their environment secure, that they'll get to stay where they're at. So again, you have to know your child to know whether or not what their reason is, to know which one of these needs they're trying to meet. All right, here comes a good one. A primary age student constantly tries to control and manipulate the classroom or your house if they're living with you. So some people said physiological survival. I'm going to say again, that's not about food, water, or air. So it would not be physiological survival. Safety, I mentioned a while ago that when our kids get stuck in that safety realm, it's all about control. So if you have a child that's extremely manipulative, one of our kids that we know has the early history of not having that cycle of need met, and they're extremely controlling and manipulative. Oh, I mean, they're good. They're good manipulators. I mean, like the best. That would probably be safety. So a lot of times it will be safety when manipulation or control is involved. Just think safety. It could be love and belonging. If I'm trying to feel like I fit in this class and I feel like the only way I'm going to fit in this class is to take over. Self-esteem. If I feel like I'm in charge, I might feel better about myself. So it could be that, probably not as likely. And self-actualization. I want to be the class bully. Now, most kids won't say that out loud and think that. But some of our kids, because they want to show how unworthy they are, their goal might be to be the class bully and to do this. So again, you have to know your kids to know what need they're trying to meet. And there's no exact science. You are playing detective when you do this. There's not an exact science for this. You are playing detective, and the better you know your kids, the better you know what they're trying to tell you. But this is how they communicate. Their positive and their negative behaviors. This is what it takes. All right. Any questions? All All right, well, I'm waiting to see if any questions come up. Again, I have this slide throughout. If you are here as a foster, adopt, or adoptive parent, or a kinship parent, or fictive kin parent, and you are raising children in partnership or for the Department for Community-Based Services, and you're taking this for training hours, they've given us a few stipulations we have to have for you to get to count this as training hours. One is you have to have your camera on for it to count face-to-face. So if you're on here to get training credit as a foster adoptive parent, kinship or fictive kin, you have to make sure that you have your camera on. And we are recording, so they will know. You have to make sure we have your name as you use it on Tris. So if you have your nickname on here, you're going to email Melissa. And Melissa, will you put your email in the chat box again? You're going to email her and let her know your name that you use on the Tris system, your date of birth, and the county you live in. That's what I was told from Department for Community-Based Services they would need. And then for everyone, if you want that certificate of attendance, at the end, I will give you a link for a Survey Monkey link. And you'll be able to go and complete that. And then next week, sometime next week, Melissa will send you a certificate of attendance. So thank you for humoring me as we do this over and over, but I just want to make sure everybody who's come on and needs those hours gets them. I don't want to somehow miss them. All right, so we've been talking about what should happen in brain development, what it should look like when things are going well and families are able to meet the needs of their kids. And I know, I just should say personally for a while, I just thought these parents don't love their kids. Why would they have treated these boys this way? They put alcohol over their boys. And what I have come to learn, you know, sometimes when you get older, you get a little bit wiser, but what I have come to learn is their parents did the best they could with what they had and with what they were given. It wasn't enough to be able to raise them, but they did love them. They did love them. We have a letter from their birth mother that went to the foster family, and we still have it. And the boys have a copy of it. And we have a picture of their birth mom. And so all it talks is about is how much mom loves her boys. Mom loves her boys. She's in alcohol treatment facility. She's getting better. She's going to be back to her boys as soon as she can. She loves her boys. And so the boys and I, when they were really having a hard time, when they were younger, little, we would sit down and read that letter together and look at her picture, and we would talk about her. And I would cry my eyes out reading it to them, and they would cry their eyes out hearing it. And so, but that's what it took. It's like I had to have that emotional touch of feeling her mamaness to make me understand this was not about love. This was not about love. It was about her ability to be a parent, to be the parent they needed her to be. And she did not have that ability due to addiction issues and mental health issues. And neither did the dad. And so once I realized that, it was so much easier to set aside the shame and blame and angry game for them, and to just be grateful that she allowed me to have two amazing young men for my sons. So now we're going to talk about reactive attachment disorder. And so we've already talked how it can be caused by that cycle of need not being met consistently. But it is actually a mental disorder that sometimes occurs when that cycle of attachment or cycle of a need is interrupted in the early years of development. And we've already talked about that some. And we've already talked about some of these things that can happen because of that. These kids can feel ongoing feelings of rage, so they're angry. They're angry. They don't even know why. Why are you doing that? I used to say that all the time. Why are you doing that? I don't know. Yes, you do know. Tell me why. I don't know. You know what? They didn't know. They just felt angry inside. They have shame. I wasn't good enough that my own parents wanted me. I'm definitely not good enough for somebody else's parents. And we used to have people tell us that. Oh, you adopted these kids. You're so good. No, we're parents. This is how we chose in our way to be parents to start with, for whatever reason, but it's not because we're these great, wonderful people. We're parents. And so a lot of times our kids don't think they deserve to have a family that meets their needs. So they feel great shame. They don't trust. We already mentioned that. They're scared to trust anyone because to attach, you have to trust. And I already said it took one son till he was a teenager, and it took the other son until he was an adult. And he made a conscious choice to start trusting us. It affects their cause and effect thinking, which I've already mentioned. And then I've already said this, they have a compulsive need to control everything, and they can be extremely manipulative, and they are really skilled at it. Many of these kids are just amazing. If they could use that skill for good instead of evil, man, what they could accomplish. All right, we got another video. Let's see if I can get it up this time correctly. Oh, okay. Can y'all hear it and see it? Melissa, can y'all hear it?
Everyone in a community has a vested interest in everyone else's children, because everyone else's children determine the next adult population that makes for a successful society. Built into our biology is the need to have responsive interactions with adults.
Neglect for children is when they don't get what the brain is expecting to get, what the child is expecting to get, what we are biologically prepared and waiting for, which is input from those around us.
It's this back and forth serve and return interaction that literally shapes the architecture of the brain.
Serve and return begins when a child looks at something or observes something, makes an utterance, and that represents the serve. And the return is when the parent notices the child doing these things and responds to the child.
Under conditions where serve and return is broken, you literally are pulling away what is the essential ingredient of the development of human brain architecture.
It was a really compelling series of experiments where they started by videotaping the mother and the baby engaging in cooing and smiling. And then they asked the mother to basically put on a blank face and not respond at all. When a baby is not attended to, that is a sign of danger to the baby biologically. So the stress systems become activated.
In a brain that is constantly bathed in stress hormones, not that's up and down, that comes with normal development, certain key synapses, the connections between nerves, fail to form, and critical regions of the brain.
So neglect both fails to provide the stimulation that's needed to develop the basic architecture, and when it's at a certain level, is one of the most potent activators of the stress biology of a young child. So you get a double whammy.
Science points to 4 categories of this spectrum of neglect. The first category would be what's called occasional inattention, where children experience responsiveness most of the time, but occasionally adults don't respond. There's no harm in that, and in fact, there's probably some benefit.
A child can learn to self-soothe and explore the environment, and all of those opportunities build brain architecture.
The second category, scientists would call chronic understimulation, is where on a regular basis, children have less interaction with the adults around them than is needed for healthy development.
Those children typically, when provided with enriched learning opportunities and more typical levels of serve and return, will show catch-up.
The third category is what science would call severe neglect in a family, where not only are there prolonged periods of inattention and lack of responsiveness, but often also associated with not being fed enough, not being bathed enough, not having basic needs met.
Neglect is a huge problem in the U.S. Children are much more likely to be neglected than they are to experience any other kind of maltreatment.
We see the child really being at risk for much more substantial kinds of deficits down the road that don't necessarily get easily fixed or ameliorated. This is where we really need to think about more complicated and often more intensive strategies to help undo those effects.
The fourth category, called severe neglect, generally found in institutional settings, is a result of children living in kind of warehoused type situation in orphanages.
And it doesn't have to even be as extreme as orphanages. It can be experiences that are regretfully occurring in many, many parts of our country.
Often institutional care in this country is under the euphemistic name of transitional care or temporary care or assessment facilities.
If you think about what institutional or residential care would look like for an infant, where there's somebody new coming on to the shift every 8 hours, it really alters the development of the child's brain architecture and other aspects of the child's development.
We have the potential to change children's developmental trajectories.
Interventions can apply to parents, to foster parents or adoptive parents, child care settings, Head Start settings, and other kinds of settings. And really, what they're about is attuning people to the serve and return process.
Neglecting young children is neglecting the foundations of a healthy next generation. The community pays a huge price later.
All right. I really like that video because I just think it shares so much about what our kids go through. And that's what I mentioned earlier, is that neglect can have a pretty significant effect, even more so than maybe other types of abuses. And so for some kids, even if they have some other types of abuses, but they do have some attachment, they've had that cycle of need-met more frequently than not, then even if they have other abuse and things that happens, they have a foundation that was created in their brain and in their being to help deal with some of the other abuses they might experience. Doesn't mean that those are okay for that to happen to them. It just means they have more resources within themselves to pull from to deal with those bad things that happen. I mentioned earlier about the children from Romania that were adopted in the United States. And so this was right after we had learned about attachment challenges or attachment disorders. And these kids were being adopted and all hell was breaking loose in the families. And these were families who were just wanting to offer a good home. They wanted to do their part. They felt called to do this, to become parents and to add to their families. Many of them already had biological children, and they were seeing stuff on the news about the orphans in Romania, and they just wanted to make a difference. They wanted to give back. They wanted to give to another child all that they had. And so they adopted these children in America, and a lot of these kids started having demonstrating severe behavior problems. And so that's that institutional piece that they were just talking about in the video, that they lived in an institution, that orphanage. And so they started doing brain scans of these kids. And here's what they saw, and it was consistent. It was consistent over time with lots of these children that they were doing this for. So that normal brain, you can see the size of it, for one. That's because all that nurturing happened to make all those things happen and help that brain grow. Also, you can see that there's not a lot of blank spots in that brain, that normal brain. In here and in here, it's a little less dense, but that's how it's supposed to be. When you get to this extreme neglect brain, you can see lots of differences between it and the normal brain. So it's smaller. This can cause the brain to shrink, might cause problems with memory, learning, and behavior. Ding, ding, ding. We've talked about those. If the child is in that constant stress, so their stress hormone's always high. Talked about my son having that anxiety. His stress hormone was always high. He's always on red alert, like the airport. When the airport goes on that highest level alert, I think it's red, that's what some of our kids, they stay on that 100% of the time. Because to let that down means I have to trust the people in my environment to maintain that safety, and they don't trust that. So they keep it at that high level of stress, and they don't learn to regulate their emotions because they're just reacting. They don't know how to respond to things. They don't think about what they're doing and then respond. They react. They're very reactive children. It's also associated with greater risk of chronic disease and mental health problems in adulthood. We even know not only does it change the trajectory of their life, it decreases their lifespan. They will die earlier, usually, than their counterparts that did not have the high stress and the early trauma and drama. So this is a pretty big deal for our kids. It's very important that we recognize that. That the physiological changes actually happen, and that can affect whether or not they ever are able to attach. And the hard part is, so you have one parent who has 4 kids, they're not able to meet the needs of those kids, so those kids get put into foster. They don't get their needs met in those early years, so they all have some type of attachment issues, maybe some type of intellectual challenges or learning disabilities, and they all grow up. So then all 4 of those kids have 3 kids. So now we're up to 12. And they don't understand how they need to do any different than what their biological parents do. And so then they raise their 12. So this is an exponential issue. It doesn't just grow birth parent to birth child to the grandchild, to the great grandchild. It grows exponentially. And so that's why this is really some serious stuff when we're talking about our kids. And right now with the opioid issues in Kentucky and the meth, the heroin, these are people that have addictions. They have behavioral health issue. It is a medical condition. What most of us believe these days, that's what I believe. It's a medical condition, but it does not allow them to be the parent their child needs, and it does not allow them to do the cycle of need in a consistent way of meeting their children's needs. And this is what can happen. And that's why they say that, for some children, they might not ever attach, or it might have permanent effect on their intellectual ability because of this, as you can see in the picture here. So this is long-term. This can have long-term effects. So now we're going to look at these symptoms of attachment disorder. And when I saw this list, when we first started learning about attachment, I was like, oh my gosh, check, 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 check. So I'm going to talk about them. And while I'm talking about them, I want you to be thinking, if you're on here as a parent, or if you're on here as a family member, if you think you know a young person, or you did know a young person, they might be an adult now, that you think had reactive attachment disorder, I want you to take a few minutes and thank you about the exponential issue comment. I want you to think about how many, in a minute we're going to do a poll, and I'm going to have you, those of you who are here and you have someone you know and love that has reactive attachment disorder, I want you to, you're going to tell me how many of the symptoms they had on the checklist here. So superficially charming. So my 2 sons, the younger one, his reactive attachment disorder was more severe, maybe because they were only 10 months apart and they are biological siblings. So maybe even the oldest one, maybe mom, while she was pregnant, was rocking him, and even though she was an alcoholic and even though she had a lot of issues, maybe she was able to rock him and take care of him and meet some of those needs, those nurturing needs. But by the time that one's 10 months old and she has the second baby and she still doesn't have any more help and she's still an active alcoholic, then it was probably even harder to meet either of their needs at that point. I don't know if that's why or not, but the younger one of the 2 had the more severe reactive attachment behaviors. Superficially charming. Oh, our social worker would come to the house and he'd say, oh, hello, Miss Gail. Can I get you some tea? Oh, Miss Gail, you look so pretty today. And when he was little, now he has very dark hair and green eyes. But when he was a little boy, he had blonde hair and big blue eyes. And he'd say, Miss Gail, I'm so glad you're here. And then when we would talk to the social worker about the behaviors we were seeing, she'd be like, I just don't see that. We can't help it if you don't see it. It's the reality. And so just recognizing they can turn a lot of people against you if you're the parent, because they make you look like you're the crazy one. And we'll talk about that a little bit further. Indiscriminately affectionate. So my son, and he did this probably till he was an adult, that it wasn't just affection, but anybody could be the mom figure. So if there was somebody that was an adult woman, they could be the mom figure or a grandma figure. And so it didn't matter where we were at. If he saw an older woman that looked like a grandma, he would just run up and hug them. And they'd be like, oh, that's so cute. Well, no, it's not. That's stranger danger. Your kid can't run up to somebody they don't know. So most families don't have to make a rule that you're only allowed to hug people who mom and dad say you're allowed to hug. But that's a rule we had to have in our house to keep Billy from running willy-nilly around the store or anywhere else, just hugging people that look like moms or grandmas. He never hugged the men, but if they look like a grandma or mom. And even as he got older, he was in residential or in treatment facilities some, and he would find the one who looked like a grandma or a mom, and that would be his mom while he was there. So it didn't have to be me, Carol Cecil, there as his mom. It was anybody who was around my age at that time that could be his mom. And so he could switch us in and out. As long as he had somebody in that row, it didn't have to be me in the row. It didn't have to be his foster mom in the row. It didn't have to be his birth mom in the row. And so understanding that indiscriminate affection is also about being able to easily switch who fills the row. They're okay as long as someone's there in that row. Problems making eye contact. And so those of you who are raising these children, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You hold them by the chin and you say, look me in the eyes, and they go everywhere but when they want something, they look you in the eyes and say, oh, mama, you're so pretty today. And you just go, yeah, right. Once you catch on. They have the severe need to control. We already talked about that. We talked about them being hypervigilant, that on red alert, where they're just always watching and waiting. Hyperactive. How many children that come through the foster care system have ADHD diagnosis? I don't know what the percentage is, but it is huge. If you go back and read the special needs adoption book for kids that are available for adoption, a large percentage of them have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder listed. And so very hyperactive. And I also mentioned reactive a while ago. So that comes along with the hyperactive. Argumentative. So a lot of them get diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder. And they may have that also. I don't know. But it really is one of the symptoms of attachment disorder. They want to argue about everything, because if they're trying to control the environment and trying to control you, no matter what you say, you're wrong. The sky is blue. No, it's not. The door opens this way. No, it doesn't. I mean, things that are obvious, you can see them, but they'll argue with it anyway. Just stupid arguing. Developmental and learning delays. We've already talked about that. Fascination with fire, blood, gore, and weapons. I don't know why that is, but for my boys, that was definitely, if they drew pictures, they were drawing pictures of guns and blood and gore. They had a aunt through their foster placement who, her and her husband collected guns. And when they would come to visit, they would bring their guns and they'd practice firing their guns. And they just had this real, like, when they saw guns, they got goo-goo-eyed when they saw guns, fire, blood, or gore. And so I don't know why that is for some of these kids, but I know for my boys, that was a true symptom. Problems with food. So we talked about physiological survival and food falling under that. And so for some of our kids, there's problems with food because they didn't have enough when they were little. And for some of them, that's how they push the food preparer in the home back. And usually that's the mom, not in all families, but in many families, we're still very traditional in our country for the most part. And oftentimes the moms are the ones fixing dinner most of the time. And so moms, parents use food to nurture our kids, not just nurture their physiological being, but we use it to nurture their spirit sometimes, you know, their connection with us. Well, if you have a child who has an attachment issues and they don't want to be connected to you, how do they best hurt your feelings? I don't like that food. Ugh, I ain't eating that. You can't make me eat that. Ugh. So for a lot of our kids, food is a problem. I was lucky enough I never had that issue. My oldest, they were both on Ritalin when they were little. And so it'd be out of their system by dinner time. They didn't eat hardly anything during the day. And by dinner time, they'd come running to the table. Oh, you fixed my favorite food, Mom. Oh, thank you. Didn't matter what I fixed every night. Oh, you fixed my favorite food. So being aware of that. Very sneaky. That goes back to the manipulation I talked about. Accident prone. Don't understand why that one is. Maybe it's because they're so busy being hyper vigilant and it looks like they're being very aware of their environment, but they're scanning so quickly all the time, they really aren't paying attention. Tantrums and rages. And this can be a 10-year-old who's throwing a 2-year-old temper tantrum for 4 hours. And so it's age appropriate for kids to have tantrums and rages when they're about 2. but they don't last for long and you're able to distract them or move them on. This is really not age appropriate, and it's for such a length of time that it's really beyond the normal tantrums or raging. They're demanding or clingy. They want everything their way. And for some of these kids, they're very clingy. So when you first adopt them or foster them, they come in and they stay stuck to you. I mean, they like just your shadow. And so other people would be, oh, that child doesn't have an attachment issue. Just because they're physically attached to you doesn't mean they're emotionally attached to you. And so they might be clingy, but that doesn't mean they are emotionally attached. Poor problem solving, we talked about that. Poor impulse control, that goes back over to the ADHD that a lot of these kids have. Little or no empathy. And that's what it took me a while to learn when my son would say, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And then I would see that I got caught. So really no empathy. Cruelty to animals. My boys did do this. So we had to watch our pets. We had to make rules about our pets and where they could be and where the boys had to be. It didn't last forever, but it was there for a while. The crazy lying. I'll share a story about that in a minute. Being destructive, tearing up things. Constant chatter. Now, my younger one of my two, he did do the constant chatter sometimes. He just would follow you around, just I mean, 24 hours a day if he could have. And as a parent, it just wears you out because he expects you to listen to him and respond to him. And, you know, at some point you got to be able to let your brain shut down for a little while. The only way I know how to describe this, and if you are a parent raising a child that does the constant chatter, I think this will make sense to you. It was almost as if he stopped talking, he failed to exist. So I don't know if that makes sense or not. If you have one of these kids and that makes sense to you, put it in the chat box. But it was like he could not stop talking. Abnormal speech patterns. So he would resort back to baby talk a lot of times. One of the strategies we used, and we talked to him about it, and at the time he happened to be 11 years old when we decided this was something we needed to work on because he was going to be going to middle school and it wasn't going to work well for him if he slid back into baby talk. And so we just did a cue. And what we set up with him was to do a cue to say 11. That's how old he was. So if we were talking to him and all of a sudden he'd go, well, Mommy, we would just say, Bill, 11. No one else in the room had to know what that meant. But that was a mental trigger or cue for him to think, oh. And he did not keep doing that. I mean, that was one of the easy things for us to kind of break that behavior because he wanted to break it also. But we just had that cue to help him realize he was falling back into that. Few or no long-term friends. So we know that many of our kids might be really good at engaging and making friends to start with. But once they are so controlling and manipulative to their friends, they don't keep friends. Some of them don't even make friends, but some of them make friends and have great trouble keeping them. They seem to have an attitude of entitlement, and I'm not sure why that is, but I have seen that. And triangulation of adults. So if you are working with a school and you're working with a therapist, and then you have a social worker involved from community-based services, and then you're the parent, so you got all these four of you working together on a team, they are going to go and they are going to try to split that team up. Their worst nightmare is having all the adults in their world on the same page. That prevents them from manipulating. So our son would go to school and he would talk about his biological family, about how they drank and they abused him, but he wouldn't tell the teachers that was his biological family. My family does this. And so, you know, but I was a teacher also, and my husband was a social worker for DCBS. So, you know, we had some people in places that had connections that helped us out, thank goodness. And so we were able to talk to the school and go, no, he's talking about that did happen to him. He's telling you true stories with his biological family. But then he'd come home from school and the teacher picked on me and the teacher did this. I didn't do anything. And so we'd email the teacher. So that's why it's easy to manipulate if we all just listen to him and we don't talk to each other. So having that team that has good communication is crucial. That is their worst nightmare. I'm not kidding you. That all the adults are on the same page and supporting each other. That really messes up all my instigating and manipulating. I said I would talk about the crazy lying, and I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try to be fast about it. But with the crazy lying, oftentimes, and I talked about how good they are at manipulating, you know, and this is just this did not really happen, but this is the only way I know how to describe it, is if you walk in the kitchen and Billy would have his arm down in the cookie jar, and I'd say, Billy, you need to get your arm out of the cookie jar. We're going to be eating dinner in a little while. My arm's not in the cookie jar. Billy, I see your arm in the cookie jar. No, it's not. Billy, stop lying and take your arm out of the cookie jar. I'm not lying. My arm's not in the cookie jar. I don't know why you think it's in the cookie jar. You always say that. By the time we're done, I am almost believing that I don't see his arm in the cookie jar. I said they're skilled, and I meant it. That's how skilled he was. And I'd have to stop myself and say, Carol, you know his arm is in the cookie jar. Don't argue with him about it. You know it. Don't let him tell you it's not in the cookie jar. I had to do self-talk to see to acknowledge what I really saw and to not be manipulated. And so for him, what we ended up starting to do, because he lied frequently, which some of our kids do, is that I would finally say, Bill, your hand is in the cookie jar, and here's what you're going to do. You're going to take it out, and you're going to say, Mom, I'm sorry. I'll wait for dinner. No, Bill, here's what you're going to say. And if I had to say that 50 times till he finally took his hand out of the cookie jar and said, Mom, I'm sorry. I'll wait for dinner. I would say it 50 times. But anytime if I was saying something to him and he started lying about it, I'd say, Bill, here's what you're going to say. It was almost as if he didn't have the ability to know how to say the truth. He was so used to telling lies to keep himself safe. That was a coping skill he learned in his very early years to survive. So that's where he went to first. But it was like he almost didn't know how to pull out the truth, or he thought he would get in trouble. So then once he would take his hand out of the cookie jar and say that, I'd say, okay, now go on. Go get your stuff. Go get your homework done. Go get your chores done. Go play outside. But I wouldn't punish him for the lying, because I would make him tell the truth before I let him go. So you have to figure out what works for you. But we did that. I did that probably all the way until his young adulthood. When he'd come in and start lying, I'd say, Bill, you need to tell the truth, and here's what you're going to say. And I just gave him the words, and he would just parrot them back verbatim, and then we'd go on. But that way he had to say the truth, and then we just both went on with life. So you figure out what works for you. That's kind of what worked for us. I said I was going to do that other poll. We've got about 7 minutes. So I'm going to pull up that other poll. And on this symptoms of attachment disorder list, if you have a child that you're thinking of might have RAD, then I want you to tell me how many. Oh, let me find the other poll. Here we go. So how many symptoms might your child have off that? If you have a child you think has attachment disorder, 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 15, 16 to 20, or 21 plus? Ooh, 21 plus. Whew. All right. So as you're finishing that up, I'm just going to keep talking because, you know, we all have some of these things. We have a lot of kids that have ADHD and they don't have reactive attachment disorder. We might have kids who have problem making eye contact. Maybe they're on the spectrum and they have difficulty making eye contact, you know. The crazy lying, not too sure about. When they lie to keep their butt out of trouble, that's one thing. When they just crazy lie over stupid things, that's different. So 1 out of 5 or up to 10, it might not be a big deal. But if you have 10, around 10 or more than that, you probably want to talk to your therapist about this checklist. And you'll be able to get it when we send out the PowerPoint. But if your kid has 16 and more, then you might need to be concerned. And if they don't have a diagnosis of reactive attachment disorder, we don't get to give that diagnosis unless you're a psychologist or psychiatrist. Then you get to. But most of us don't get to give that diagnosis. But what you can do, like I said, is print this off, check the ones you think apply, and take that to talk with your child's therapist about. And it's not about whether their diagnosis is, it's about figuring out strategies for dealing with these behaviors and these symptoms. So, and figuring out how you go back to meet those unmet needs. So I'm going to share the polling real quick so you can see what kind of answers we got. So most of the people fell in the 6 to 10. which may or may not be anything to worry about. Like I said, many of our kids have some of these symptoms or behaviors. Some of us have these behaviors. My husband might tell you I constant chatter. I don't think I do, but he might. So just be aware. All right, I'm going to stop sharing the results so we can get back to the PowerPoint. We are almost out of time. All right. There are 4 types of attachment. We're going to go over each one of these kind of quickly since we are running out of time. Secure attachment is what we want. These are kids who had that cycle of need met. They're not perfect, but they feel pretty competent and confident in life in general. Some of our kids feel this way more than others. For my 2 homegrown children, my daughter, life has just been easy for her. I don't know why. That's just her personality. That's just who she is. She's been an easy child to raise, and life has been easy for her. She's able to kind of roll with the punches. My younger son, who's also my biological son, he has secure attachment, but that doesn't mean life's been easy. He still has anxiety. He still struggles with depression. He still has some of the behavioral health. He's not as self-assured. He's not as confident. And they both grew up in the same house. It's just different personalities that they're born with. So just recognizing these are kids that are able to grow up, have relationships, and just, most of the time they're able to make it through life. Not perfect, but good enough that they're okay. Resistant attachment, this might be that child that's clingy. They're very stressed. They have that high anxiety, temper tantrums and rages. They can't make commitments, so they won't tell you what they're going to do, or they change their mind a lot. They have difficulty in school. They're very irritable. They're very grumpy. They might engage in high-risk behaviors, and they feel very codependent. They're not fully self-reliant. So it's like they always have to have someone as their partner in crime. And so a lot of times this might be the younger sibling of 2, and so it might be the older sibling that they depend on, because that older sibling oftentimes becomes the parental figure for them. So just realizing that. Avoidant attachment, they might be actively hostile. They might look like a bully. They might be whiny. That's one of my behaviors that I hate. I hate whiny behaviors. They're very needy yet distant. One time I found this book about antisocial personality disorder, I think it was called I Hate You, Don't Leave Me. And that's how I felt with my son that had attachment disorders. I hate you, get away, don't leave me, come back. I hate you, get away, don't leave me, come back. And that was pretty much life with him. So that needy yet very distant. They might be compulsively self-reliant. So sometimes this might be the older child who had to be the parental figure, still not able to make commitments. They might isolate themselves and withdraw from interacting. They always blame others for their mistakes. I don't know why, but my boys did that. So it wasn't me. It wasn't me. It's okay if it was you. It's not a big deal. That wasn't a big deal. They might be unable to show affection unless they want something. So unless they're manipulating you, they don't make eye contact, and they don't come up and hug on you or love on you or hold your hand. Now, if they want something, then they'll do all those things. Oh, I love you, mama. Kiss you on the cheek. They're easily angered. They're very reactive. I already mentioned that. They tend to be vengeful. And I don't know why this is, but I have noticed this with many of our children that have behavioral health challenges. It's like everything is on a scale that has to be equal. So if somebody does them wrong, they feel they have to get the scale even. So they have to get them back. It's almost like they have to. They can't even discuss not getting them back, because then it's like their brains can't stop until that scale becomes balanced again. I don't know why that is, but I have seen that over and over. Again, engages in high-risk behavior, which includes alcohol and drugs. And I know we're almost out of time. Disorganized attachment is kind of a combination of the 3 behaviors from the 3. This is where that vulnerable to stranger danger thing, because they'll easily just go with anybody. They might be underachieving and unmotivated. So they're hard to motivate. They're just kind of stuck where they're at. Here again, if you didn't get Melissa your information, Melissa, please put your email back in there again. If you are getting credit as a resource parent, get this to Melissa or you will not get credit. Melissa at kypartnership.org. All right. We're going to finish up talking about some strategies. One of the things you have to do as a parent is you have to identify that underlying need. Physiological survival, safety, love and belonging, self-esteem, self-actualization. What is their behavior telling you? You might have to consequence the behavior. So if you still might make them take it back to the store and give it back and say they stole it, or if they ate it, something they ate, they go back and pay for it. But if they're doing that, if they stole something because they want to fit in, you still have to find another way to meet that need. So if that's the need, you still have to consequence them for stealing. That's one part of the discipline. The second part is you have to find a way to meet that need. So you have to start thinking, what types of groups for love and belonging can they fit into? Can they fit into the church teen group or the church youth group? Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. Are they good athlete? Can they fit in with the baseball team or a football team? Are they good at art? So maybe they can be in the art club or the drama club. You have to figure out where they can kind of show their strengths at. You want to show empathy. This is something I learned way after my boys were raised. I didn't feel sorry for them because most of the time I was so angry at them. They were just wearing me out. But the reality is they didn't choose to be this way. They were developed this way by the people outside of them. And just saying, man, that really sucks. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. I don't have to fix it for them, but I also don't have to blame them for it. So they come home from school and they've been picked on, they've had a bad day. It's okay to say, that really sucks. I'm sorry you had to go through that. And even as adults, I have to do that with them. They're almost 39 and 40, and I still have to tell myself, don't fix it. Don't ask the questions. Just acknowledge that whatever they're dealing with sucks, or that doesn't sound fun, or I'm sorry you're having to go through that, and then let them finish figuring it out. Remain proactive. So you got to think about what sets them off. And if something sets them off, then you need to be proactive about. So if it's an environment that sets them off, then don't take them to that environment. If they have to go to that environment, how can you modify that environment to work for them? And this is one of the biggest ones. This t-shirt says, this is me ignoring you, because a lot of times we can ignore a lot of behaviors, and that's being proactive also. Be neutral. Our kids' job is to get us, and our job is to not get got. So especially kids with attachment disorder, they're trying to manipulate you. They're trying to control you. As our therapist told us with our boys, they are they are casting their fishing rod, and whatever the bait is, they're baiting us. And when we jump on it, which we did frequently, they just reeled us right in with a big old smile on their face. But if they threw that out and we didn't jump on it and we just said, oh, hey, look, they threw that bait over here. What y'all doing? Then that didn't give them anything to be happy about. They didn't have control over us. So just be aware that if they have control, it's not usually good. Here's just real quick ones. You want to make eye contact and use their name to get their attention. You need to maintain control of the environment. Don't take it personally. As much as you can use a matter-of-fact tone instead of an angry tone with them, like, oh, like I just said, oh, that really sucks. That helps because it doesn't trigger them or push them into a different mood. Communicate frequently with your team members, like I mentioned earlier. Share strategies that work. What worked at school for the teacher? What worked at home for you? What worked for the football coach? Encourage all the people on the team to take care of themselves, because all of you are having a hard time with this kid. I already mentioned about triangulation, where they try to split, divide, and conquer. You don't want to baby them. You do want to have high expectations. I got really frustrated because sometimes people did not have high expectations for my boys, and that wasn't good enough. I needed to have high expectations, and so did everybody else. Expect them to have good manners and be appropriate. Remain calm and in control. If you think the child will tell stories about you and say you've abused them in any way, fashion, or form, then don't be alone with the child until you feel like they won't do that. Be sensitive to their past traumas. There's a reason they're acting this way. Billy's lying was a coping skill. There was a reason he acted that way. I hated it, but that was the reality. Ask for help when you need it if you're a parent or if you're parenting a child like this. And big doses of empathy, I already mentioned. All right. Avoid control battles. Help them understand good behavior gets good consequences. Bad behavior gets bad consequences. Be committed and persevere. Let them know that you will continue pushing. Like I said, it took my one son till he was an adult to decide he wanted to be attached. It was when we finally quit pushing. He turned 18 and we said, we love you and we will always be your parent. You will always be our son. You will always be our son. Now you can decide whether or not you still want us to be your parents. And when he turned 18 and we told him that, and we were no longer saying, we are your parents, tough luck whether you like it or not, that changed. It changed. And he decided he wanted us to be his parents. And everything changed for him at that moment. Be positive. Look for the good things they're doing. They have so many negatives going on in their life. I'm not going to read that to you. Going to go on through. Sorry, these are long slides. So a lot of times people look at us as parents and they think, well, no wonder the kid acts that way. Look how cold and distant that parent, that mom is. You know what? Most of us started off real nurturing. But when you get beaten down so much by the kids' behavior sometimes and by the professionals who are serving you and your family, then it's sometimes real hard to stay positive. Eventually you just get tired and you shut down. Same for feeling defeated. Many of us as parents go through depression ourselves and anxiety because we get so beaten down because parenting kids with attachment disorder is so hard. We always have to be on our toes because our kids are always on their toes. We get blamed a lot. It's our fault. Maybe we didn't do this to them. They came to us with this, but we didn't love them enough to fix them yet. I had many people tell me that. Maybe we're just so selfish. We haven't done what we need to do for them yet. And a lot of times we're unrealistic. We think, oh, I'm going to get, like I said, I wasn't very smart. Oh, I'm going to get these kids and I'm going to love them and I'm going to love them enough that they're going to be better. And love was a big piece of it, but it's not enough. And being committed. Some people just think you're so wonderful because you're committed to them. Well, once you're a parent, you are committed. That's how life works. Here again, contact Melissa. This will be a lot of the resources that I got this information from. And so this will be with the PowerPoint. SurveyMonkey link. Melissa, can you take that and put it in the chat box? Or here I might be able to. I don't know if I can or not. I'll put that in the chat box and I will stay around for about 5 minutes or more to make sure that all of you can click on that and go to the evaluation because that's what will trigger your certificate of attendance if you need that. So I will come back to that. Don't panic. I just want to tell you, you can survive RAD. These are my boys all grown up. This is last week. We went camping and we had not been able to do a vacation with the two older boys because their work schedules. And so we were able to go camping and my oldest son, he's on full disability, but his girlfriend of 16 years works. And so he's never able to come because he's her driver. And so that's them over here. That's my oldest and his girlfriend. So they can attach and they can love and they can understand how to trust people. They can get there. This is the younger one. And he finally chose to trust us and love us. And let me tell you, he does. It's just amazing to me. I'm so proud of them. And we had such a good time. We had adult relationship with them camping. And my husband and I still look at each other and we still go, we never would have thought we could have had this type of relationship with them as adults based on when they were kids. And this is my three oldest. So they're doing dishes on Thanksgiving. My youngest one has moved to New York, so he wasn't here at this time. And just the whole family. And it is a family. And we did all survive RAD. And we continue to grow and just be, I wouldn't say a normal family. I don't think my family's normal at all. But thank you, Melissa. Melissa put the link in there so you can go to it. But you can survive. There is hope while raising children with attachment disorder. And I didn't always think that. On my 30th birthday, I sat on my kitchen floor and I cried for hours because I was so exhausted. And thought, we are not going to make it through this. We are not, our marriage isn't going to make it, or the kids aren't going to make it, or we're not going to make it. Somebody ain't going to make it through this. But we did. So there's hope. Don't give up. Don't give up. Thank you so much. Please make sure you fill out the, go fill out the evaluation. Make sure you get the information to Melissa if you needed credit. And like I said, I'm going to stop sharing, but I'm going to stay on here so that you make sure everybody has time to get the link out of the chat box. Thank you all. Have a great week. Next week, we're going to have a training. We don't have it up for registration yet, but it's about building your natural support system. So if that's something you're interested in, watch for it on our website and on our Facebook page. Thank you all. Have a great day.